Well, welcome everyone. We're continuing our month-long series on peacemaking. And today I'm talking with Donna Jones, the author of the book Healthy Conflict, Peaceful Life, a biblical guide for graceful communication and lasting resolution. It focuses on the important theme of constructive communication, expressing thoughts, feelings, and opinions with grace, truth, and without any regrets. I've read it, and I think it is a book that everyone should have on their shelf. In fact, I've been recommending it to all my people, including my adult children. And although I've been married 33 years, I still underlined a bunch of valuable tips and insights that I thought, oh my gosh, that is dead on. So, Donna is a national speaker, church planter, pastor's wife, and self described, and I love this, Bible explainer. So good. She's spoken all over the country, and she is the host to the weekly That's Just What I Needed podcast. She's written several other books and Bible studies and is passionate about equipping others to know, love, and follow God in their real everyday lives. She and her husband, JP, make their home in Southern California. We are so privileged to have her on our show today. Welcome, Donna.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's my privilege to be here.
So thankful, so grateful. And I love Southern California. As I said when we met, I lived in San Diego a while back, and you said you're from Orange County. So, of course, I know right where that is. And our daughters apparently went to Biola University at the same time. So we'll see if they know each other. That would be so amazing. But where do your children live now?
They live, well, two of our kids live 10 minutes from us. So our kids are all young adults, but two of them live about 10 minutes from us.
Nice.
And then our son lives in Redondo Beach, so about an hour from us. So everybody's pretty close.
Oh,
Everybody's still here in Southern California, which is great.
that's great. That is great. Yeah, I have kids, two kids here in Austin, where I live in Austin, Texas, but one lives in New York City, and I don't like that. So, but she loves it. So, what are you going to say? What are you going to do?
What are you
Right?
going to do? That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the book, which I just am so excited. What motivated you? Why did you decide to write this book on conflict?
Such a great question, Candace, because who wants to set about writing a book on conflict? I mean, not too many people, right? What
Yeah.
happened is that I started writing a book about how to have better relationships, healthier relationships. And I wasn't into it very long. And I realized, oh, wait a minute. The reason we don't have better relationships is largely due to the presence of conflict in our lives
Mm,
and how we deal with it. And everybody knows this. Your listeners are all going to resonate with this, is that relationships generally clip along fine and they're a source of great joy. But when conflict is in the mix and it's unresolved, we literally are consumed by it. I mean, we
yeah.
think about what he said, what we said, what we wish we'd said. We're tormented by guilt. We don't know how to handle it. We want it just to go away. And it
Mm.
doesn't matter whether it's our relationship with our spouse or our children or our friends. This is just all encompassing. So I figured, since this is the thing that trips us up from having better relationships, why not look at what God's word says and get uber practical and figure out how we are to deal with conflict? So that's how the book came to be.
And it is so practical. And of course, weave scripture all the way through, and how Jesus talked about handling conflict. And it's really incredible how much teaching he does
Mhm.
on it, because obviously he knows that he tells us to love our neighbor as ourself, but he knows that that is going to be a really difficult thing. And so he speaks about it and gives us tips constantly. And you weave all that into the book, which is just so good. So, so glad you wrote it. And so, how do you believe conflict can serve as a platform for personal development?
Yeah, well, it really can. And most people don't really think about this because when we are in conflict, we tend to look at the other person. If
Mm,
they just wouldn't say that, if they just wouldn't do that, if they would just listen to me, what they did, that hurt my feelings. What they did, that was wrong. And in many cases, we're right when we're thinking about other people. Sometimes their behavior is wrong or their words are hurtful. But the reality is, we can't do one thing to change another person. And that's
right.
where we go sideways because we
Hmm.
tend to think, I can't be happy in this relationship, or we can't have a good relationship, or unless the other person changes. And so we set about to change the other person, which of course is a crazy maker. So instead, we have to say, time out. I need to look at myself first. I can
Mm,
change myself. I can change how I show up in this relationship. I can change how I communicate in this relationship. And then by doing that, then I actually end up growing whether
yes.
or not the other person changes. And
Yes.
so it can actually serve to be a really good avenue for personal growth. But also, one of the things I repeat in the book a lot, as you probably remember, is that the reason so many of us think conflict is bad is because we never learned to see how conflict could turn out good.
Yes.
And when it's handled right, then it actually can create more closeness between two people, and it can serve to resolve some of those unspoken things that have been getting in the way from real intimacy. So if you can handle conflict right, man, it has the potential to be game changing and
Absolutely.
relationship altering. So,
Yes. And I love how you talk in the book. You said you gave the example of going to the eye doctor and
mhm,
when you had cataracts as a young woman and you said normal, he said to you because you were kind of struggling, I don't have cataracts. Normal doesn't always mean healthy.
mhm.
Normal doesn't always mean healthy. So let's talk about that for a second because you said that many of us don't know how to handle conflict. It's never been taught to us. It wasn't modeled well for us. And so we just respond in particular ways just out of habit. And but that doesn't mean that it's healthy. So yeah, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. And that was such and I mean, excuse the pun, but it was such an eye-opening truth for me to when he said that, because I just kept I kept defending myself. I see fine. I see clearly. I promise, it's all good. And finally, he just looked at me and he said, Donna, normal, just because it's normal for you doesn't mean it's healthy. And in the same way with conflict, maybe we grew up in our family of origin where conflict was bad. And so we had a mom that she wanted to keep the peace at all costs. And so she just acquiesced. She gave in. She didn't speak her mind. Or maybe we grew up in a home where people just tiptoed around all these kinds of issues. And we never talked about the elephant in the room, but
Mhm.
everybody knows the elephant was in the room. Or maybe we grew up in a family that just exploded and people, they wanted to get things out, but the way they got things out was by slammed doors and raised voices. And so we come into marriage and we come into parenting, and our conflict styles, that's all we know.
Yeah.
And sometimes, interestingly, our conflict style is in opposition to the way our family of origin
Oh,
did conflict. So maybe we were raised where everybody screamed and we were like, I am not going to do that. So we take the opposite extreme, excuse me, and we think, okay, well, I'm never gonna get upset. I'm never gonna do that with my kids because my mom, she lost her temper with me all the time. I'm never gonna do that. And as a result, maybe we don't address some things with our kids that we need to
mhm.
in a healthy way. So it can manifest itself in many different ways. This idea that what's normal to us doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy.
Absolutely. And I love you give the conflict styles in the book.
Mhm, mhm,
And I found it so fascinating because I mean, I've had counseling. I've been through counseling because I had kind of a crazy dysfunctional upbringing myself. But I never actually thought about the way you have put this on paper. And when I saw the competitor, that's what I grew up with. I
mhm,
grew up with two competitors that were constantly arguing, and it was very, like you just said, it was modeled for me to get it out so I don't avoid, but I don't handle it necessarily in an effective way. And so I'm the minority, I believe. I believe that most people are conflict avoiders,
Mhm.
but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, now that would be an interesting to study. I don't know the answer to that. I do know in the book I have what I call the conflict continuum. And
Mm-hmm.
on one side are the avoiders, and are on the other side are the attackers. And neither of those are healthy
Right.
because they don't fix anything. The sweet spot in the middle where Jesus wants us to land is to be an addresser. So we're not
Yes.
avoidant, we're not attackers, we are addressers.
Yes.
And that's where we're going, because if we can address issues, for the avoiders, and in the book, I talk about, okay, this is how you do it. What if you're an avoider? Then this is how you actually move forward to start addressing some of these issues that need to be addressed. Or what if you're an attacker? How do you take into consideration the way you actually communicate what you want to communicate? And
Yes. You gave great tips on how to, all throughout the book, on how to fix some of your issues, and but first just understanding what those issues are.
yeah,
And so that was really good. And then so you talk about the most important quality necessary for handling conflict in a healthy way. What is that quality, and
yes.
why is it important?
Yes. Okay, this right here is the game changer. And when
Yep.
most people think about handling conflict well, they think about some sort of skill. It's an action, something that I need to say, something that I need to do, or something that I need to not say or not do. It's some sort of action. But actually, the real key to handling conflict well is not an action, it's an attitude. And the attitude is humility.
Yes.
Because humility says, this is me and you against the problem, not me against you as you are the problem. So,
Hmm.
and I think being humble is largely misunderstood, even in the Christian
Yes.
community, because some of us, we tether being humble to humiliation. And so we're in the midst of a conflict, and we think, okay, yeah, I know the Bible says I'm supposed to be humble, but if I'm humble right now, I'm going to get walked all over. I'm going
Hmm.
to be a doormat, and there is just no way. I'm not going to do that. You just don't get it. You need to stand up for yourself. So I'm not going to be humble because I don't want to be a doormat. But we can't tether being humble with humiliation, because being humble does not make us a doormat for exploitation. It makes us a doorway for conversation.
That's perfect. Yes. And you also said the power, it enables us to handle conflict in a way that helps
Mhm.
rather than hurts. And I really love that, because we just, it's our perspective, right? Because we,
Mhm.
like you were saying, we look at the other person as the problem. But if we're humbly accepting that there's something I'm doing here, and just stop at that point and reframe it, that is huge, and managing the whole situation. So I really like that.
Yeah. And I think too that the misunderstanding about humility is that a humble person doesn't fully speak their mind, or a humble person can't get angry. And that's not true. Humble people still speak their mind. They still have opinions. They still are passionate about things. They're still even angry, but it's the way they communicate those things takes other people into account. And
Right.
that's the key. We take
Love it.
other people into account.
That's so good. So, why is it important that we deal with conflict in a way that honors God?
Well, a couple reasons. Number one, because as just basic, as believers, the Apostle Paul said, I make it my goal to please him.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, if we're believers, we want to please the Lord. That's number one. Number two is that it, it brings us the biggest level of peace. And I think that that's really a huge component. We're motivated to have peace ourselves,
Yep.
but the way we handle conflict is either going to bring us more peace or more problems. Period.
Mhm.
Period. So why not handle it in a way that's going to bring more peace and less problems? So and in fact, the book is called Healthy Conflict, Peaceful Life, because when you handle conflict a healthy way, you'll have a more peaceful life, more peaceful family, more peaceful marriage, more peaceful friendships, more peaceful
Yeah.
soul, frankly.
Yeah, and then you also talk about unity in the body. I thought that was
Mhm.
really good because as Christians, so often we don't handle our anger well. And, there's the scripture that says, in your anger, do not sin. And we as Christians often think, well, that just means bury my anger. But you point out that that's not what that's saying. It's saying you're going to be angry because it's an emotion, but do not sin. And so that's the whole thing about how you handle it, how you react. And I love that so often. I've been part of a church split where the conflict was handled so poorly. And I really resonated with your story about wanting to burn the church down.
Yeah, that
That
was
was
pretty vulnerable, wasn't it?
Yes, and it was so good, and you wove it all the way through the book, even to the end of explaining how God freed you from all that to the point where you have those strong relationships now. You're speaking at that church. I mean, God restored it all, which is what he can do
Mhm.
when we do things the right way. But it really impacted me as I thought about how conflict is so poorly handled often in the church. And I just love the way you dealt with that in the book. So that's just one of my encouragements for people to get the book and read that because people get hurt by churches. They get
Yes,
hurt by people in churches.
they
And
do.
sometimes it drives people away from the church altogether. And that's not what is we're called to fellowship with one another. We need each other and those that conflict is always going to happen, right?
Yeah, yeah. And and I just want to speak into somebody that is maybe experiencing that right now. That and I okay, I'm a pastor's wife. So, I became a Christian as a child. So I've lived in Jesus for a very long time. But when we went through our extreme church hurt experience, I very specifically remember thinking, wow, I'm really grounded in my relationship with the Lord. But if I wasn't, I would drown right now. It's so hurtful. And if you're experiencing that, you're not the only one. Um, and I want to just offer you compassion, but also offer you hope and tell you to cling to the Lord. Do not walk
Amen.
away from the Lord because if you will just hang on, he can redeem what you're going through. He can teach
Mhm.
you. He can grow you. He can restore you, and just press it when you want to lean out, when you want to run away. Press in. Just press in harder. Make that choice.
I love that. So good. Yeah, we have to it's part of just the sin, the fallen world that we live
Mhm.
in. People are gonna in the church, they're gonna sin and they're gonna do things that hurt us, but there is a way to have healthy conflict resolution. And so, I love how you address all that. And one of the great things that you talked about was just how to be a good listener,
Mm,
which is so important. And, it dawned on me that a lot of us don't know how to listen. And you said something that really hit me. You said, listening doesn't just mean sitting there quiet, it means
mhm.
engaging and asking questions,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And this, I think, is particularly helpful when we are dealing with messy emotions, both ours and other people's. Especially, your listeners are all moms. We're all moms.
Mhm.
And so we know what it's like to be dealing with a child with a lot of big emotions, messy emotions. And I tell a story in the book where my daughter came home and she had had a really bad day and had expressed it to one of her friends. And she thought she was going to get sympathy and empathy. And instead she got, well, welcome to real life. There was just no sympathy. And she came home and she goes, Mom, I wish you'd been here earlier. You listen. And I remember
Oh.
thinking, oh, wow, that's a huge compliment. But then I replayed some of my earlier mom experiences and I realized I didn't always listen. That this was something that I had to learn largely because a lot of times I got it wrong and I made things worse rather than better without even knowing. I didn't mean to, but this is what I would do, Candace. My kids would come, home with some big emotions, frustration, anger, upset, over with a friend at school or maybe with a sibling or something going on. And I would want to fix it immediately. Well, why don't you do that? Or when I was a kid, I did this, or I know how you feel. I would want to fix it or I would dismiss it by saying things like, oh, you don't really feel that way, or it's not that big of a deal, or don't be such a drama queen, or, you'll get over it, or look on the bright side, all of those things. But what ends up happening is when we diminish or we dismiss messy emotions, what happens is the other person, they escalate those messy emotions. They escalate the conflict because when they're expressing something to us, what they really want is to be understood.
Right.
So when we don't listen, and side note, listening does not equal agreement. Listening just means listening and listening to understand. So we don't have to agree with our husband's perspective, our friend's perspective, our child's perspective, whomever is bringing these messy emotions. But what we do need to understand is that they want to be understood. So if we can just listen to understand that instead of escalating the conflict, that de-escalates the conflict. So if we don't listen, something happens in the mind of a person where when they're not being understood, they go, wait, this person is not getting it. So I guess I need to escalate it more. So I
Mm.
guess I need to get louder. I guess I need to
Uh-huh.
get more dramatic. I guess I need to slam the door really hard. Maybe then she'll get it and she'll
Mm.
understand how important this is to me. If we still don't get it, something clicks in their minds and they go, okay, she's never going to get it. So they end it. So it's
Yeah.
escalate or end. And when a person ends it, they say things like, okay, just forget it. You don't get it. You don't understand. You're never going to understand. And then when we try to get them to open up, like, okay, no, tell me how you feel. Tell me what you mean. No, they say, forget it, forget it. This conversation is over.
Yeah.
And so it's escalate or end, right? Which is a
Hmm.
horrible way for conflict to go.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, you talk about the silent treatment and the difference. That's one of the ways that people handle conflict, right? Is just going into shutdown mode and not talking, thinking, that that's going to help the situation. So there's all kinds of ways that we can escalate, quote
Mhm.
unquote, right? But it's definitely not healthy.
Yep.
And yeah, um, so that's really good. Yeah, listening is a key, don't you
Yes.
think, to conflict resolution?
Oh my goodness, yes. And here's the interesting thing because you brought up the silent treatment. Did you know that shouting and the silent treatment are two sides of the same coin?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, they're just different ways of saying, hear what I want you to hear, see what I want you to see, understand what I'm trying to get across to you. One person just does it aggressively, the other person does it
Passive
passively.
aggressive.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the two sides of the same coin. We're
Yeah,
just trying to get the person to see that we're upset.
yeah. So another great tip that I think is so important, especially for women, was you went into Matthew 18:15, which we cannot talk about conflict resolution unless we point out how Jesus told us to deal with it when people hurt us. So let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Yes. That's the passage where Jesus says, if your brother or sister sins against you, go um, just between the two of you and point out their fault. And if you break it down, there's really four steps of how to deal with a difficult situation where you feel like somebody has wronged you. And those 4 steps are go. And we most of us stop right here
Right.
because we think things like, well, I don't know when I would go. I don't know what I would say if I would go. You don't understand. That person would never listen to me even if I went. So we stop before we even put step 1 of Jesus's instructions into practice.
Hmm.
And what we often do is that we don't go to the person, we go to other people.
Yes.
So we go to our friend and we tell our friend what the problem is. And we think, well, maybe she'll say something to that other friend. And then that other friend will know that I'm upset. Or, you know,
It sounds kind of ridiculous when you're saying that, but that is somehow that's exactly what we think.
yeah, yeah. Or, let's just say it's with a family and a family member, and, it's something with our sister. And so we say something to our mom because if we say it to our mom, maybe our mom will say something to our sister. Or, we triangulate these relationships because we don't want to go.
Right.
And then we get tripped up because we wonder why we're perpetuating all of these problems. And we have this ongoing conflict in our families and in our
Mm.
friendships. So the
Mhm.
first step is to go. And then it says go privately, just
Yes.
between the two of you. And this is just so beautiful because, again, if we're not talking to the person, in all likelihood, we're talking about the person, and that just
That's
never
right.
goes well.
That's
So we
right.
go privately, and what that does is that communicates respect.
Mm.
It's like, I'm not talking about this to anyone else. This is you and me. And that's what and a humble person, remember, thinks about the other person. And so that communicates respect. And so we go just privately, the two of us, and it says, point out their fault. And, at this point, some people that maybe are on the more attacking side are like, yippee, now I get to tell this person all the ways that they hurt my feelings and they wronged me.
Mm.
But that's not what this is talking about.
Nope.
When Jesus says point out their fault, that point out, it is saying give concrete evidence, concrete example of one thing that was the offense. Just give an example. And see, again, a lot of us, we drop hints like breadcrumbs. I'm not going to just say exactly what it was. I'm going to drop some hints and just hope you kind of remember the situation that hurt my feelings or that I felt was wrong. Well, then, the other person may or may not get it.
Right.
So that's why Jesus says, okay, just give a concrete example of what it was. And he says, so point out their fault. And that's singular, not plural.
Yes. I
So
love
we
that.
don't like dump truck 25 things that this person has done over the last 3 years that have hurt us or wronged us. So we go privately, we point out their fault, the fault. And then Jesus says, and this is so genius, if they listen to you. And that word if allows for a contingency because Jesus doesn't say when they listen to you because
Mm.
they may not.
That's
So
right.
he says, if, then you've won your brother. Then now, okay, you've talked about the situation. There's been apologies. There's been communication. There's been understanding. Um, there's been reconciliation. Well, then you've won your brother. And now that issue is no longer an issue and you don't need to bring it up again. But if they don't, then Jesus goes on and says, take somebody else with you. And then, he gives it some other
Mhm.
indications of what to do if it doesn't go well the first time. But it's step by step, and it's literally the pathway for the best possible outcome when we're dealing with conflict.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. And again, when you're talking about not just making the fault a single issue,
Hmm.
and dealing with those, because I love how you said that people build brick walls.
Mm,
If they let those issue, they don't address the issue, and it keep or that happens again and again, or other things compound it, and then suddenly you've got this huge wall, and then the relationship just it's very difficult to recover.
yeah.
And And so I love how you said, let's take it one brick at a time
Mhm.
and not let those things build up.
Yeah, because to your point, in the book, I talk about this, as you said, this one brick. So, let's just suppose, Candace, you and I are having a conflict. You said something that hurts my feelings. So that's a brick laid down between you and me. If I don't deal with that, if I just say, okay, you know what, that really hurt my feelings. I don't know why she said that, but you know what, I have to go to Target. I have to take the kids to school. I have to do my thing, and I just forget about it. Um, if you never say something again that hurts my feelings, that might be okay because it's just one little brick. But if you then do something else that hurts me or wrongs me, it is another brick, and it's laid upon that first brick. And
Right.
then if I still don't address it, it's another brick and then another brick. And pretty soon I have a wall between you and me of unaddressed issues. And then
Mm,
that's when people look at their relationship and they go, there's no hope because they
right.
don't even see the person. All they see is the wall of problems, the wall of hurt, the wall of disappointment, the wall of wrong. And
Hmm.
so that's why it's important to address things, when they happen, when they're small things, and then they don't become big things and they don't
Yes.
create
So
barriers.
good. So good. And then you also have a provision in there for, you're talking about go and the steps that Jesus gives us in Matthew 18. But there are certain circumstances when the conflict is something that we shouldn't go
Yes.
on, and you give a provision for that too. And so
Yes.
you wanna talk about that for a second?
Yeah. Well, there's two, and they're kind of on the different ends of the spectrum. Sometimes they're just small things. And there's actually a chapter in the book called Should I Be Mad? And it's, big things, small things, and everything in between. And there's just some things that, you just better part of wisdom is just to let it go. It's just a dumb little thing that, it was a careless mistake that somebody made. They forgot something or they did something and you just let it go. Right.
Right.
But we have to know what are the big things and what are the small things. So that's one end of the spectrum where we just maybe not address something if it's just a small one-time thing. But on the other end, where we don't go is if there's abuse involved, there is maybe you have gone in the past and there has been um, it hasn't gone really well, and you just are the recipient of the other person's venom. Uh,
Yes.
those are there are some boundaries that we need to set up there and put those in place, and that's wise too. And Jesus
Yes.
did say, "Be as innocent as a dove, but as wise as a serpent." And
Mm.
because Jesus knows people's hearts. Sometimes, I mean, we are always to be innocent. We're to do the right thing. But we are also are to be wise because there are some people out there that will just frankly hurt us. So
Yeah.
there's that aspect as well.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring that out because I thought that was super important. And so as we start to wrap up, we're thinking about as we resolve this conflict, even if we don't, forgiveness is
Mhm.
such an important call that Jesus has to us about when relationships don't work the way they should, or we are hurt or whatever. So, why do you think that's so important? Let's talk about restoration and forgiveness.
Yes. Well, it's important because, we're commanded as believers to forgive as we've been forgiven, but that does not mean it's easy, right?
Right.
Anybody who's been deeply wounded understands this. And I would say that's probably 100% of us. It's hard. So I'm going to go back, Hannah, since you referenced it, to the situation where my husband and I were kind of just unwitting players in this church hurt experience where the church that my husband was on staff at ended up splitting. And it was so painful. And, but I knew I'd been called to forgive. I just didn't know how. And one day I just tiptoed my way into vulnerability with our worship pastor's wife. And I said, I know I'm supposed to forgive, but I don't know how. I don't even know what that looks
Mm.
like. I
Mhm.
don't know if I can. I know I should. I want to because Jesus tells me that I need to, but I don't even know where to begin. And I will never forget. She placed her hands on my shoulder and she turned her to face her eye to eye. And then she looked at me with complete compassion and she said, Donna, the fact that you want to please the Lord or that you want to forgive pleases the Lord,
Yes.
and He will show you how.
Yes.
And that was so healing to me for her to say the fact that you just want to learn how to do it, even if you're not there yet, that's the first step. So I would say to anybody who's really struggling right now because you're wounded, and maybe you're even in the point where you're like, well, that just makes me mad that I have to forgive. I'm not even there yet. You know, um,
Mhm.
maybe you're there because sometimes it just seems like I feel like I'm giving them a free pass. I would say just pray for the want to. Just start there.
Yes.
And then realize number two, that forgiveness is not giving the other person a free pass
Mm.
to hurt you again. That's not what it is. And it's not even saying it's not a big deal because the reality is that what they did to you was such a big deal that it cost Jesus his life because it was sin. So it's a big deal and God knows it's a big deal. So, so forgiveness is understanding those two things. And then I would say this, and I write about this in the book, Candace, when I was writing this chapter, I feel like God just downloaded this visual image to me. And it was to picture the issue that hurt you, like open the
Yes.
palm of your hand and picture the issue that hurt you laying in the middle of the palm of your hand. And then close your fingers around it. And all of your fingers represents a reason that you're still hanging on to that hurt, to that woundedness. It could be what they did was wrong. They skipped off to a better life and left me with all the baggage. They never apologized. I tried to do the right thing and they were sinful and it feels like they got away with it. Whatever those reasons are, name them out loud. And as you name them, just unfold those fingers one by
Mm.
one until that offense is laid bare in the palm of your hand. And then turn your hand over and let that offense drop into the nail scarred hands of Jesus. That's
Beautiful.
forgiveness.
Mm. That is just beautiful and exactly what I think a lot of us need to hear. It's a process. Forgiveness is a
Yes.
process.
Yes, it is.
And you're talking about how it took you years
Mhm.
to get to that spot.
It did.
So, yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough, Donna. This has been very, very good. I just, again, love this book. How can our listeners connect with you and get a copy of the book?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would love to connect with your listeners. As a fellow mom, we're just all in this together. So you can get a copy of the book everywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon, christianbooks.com, Barnes and Noble, Faith Gateway, just everywhere. And I think it's even online at Target and Walmart. So everywhere books are
Oh,
sold.
great.
And you can also get it on my website. I have a lot of free resources, by the way, on my website. You can take a quiz to find out what your particular conflict style is. So that's kind of fun. And there's some other free resources there. And my website is donnajones.org. And then I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. I'm at Donna A. Jones. And I have to put the A in there because with a name like Jones, Donna
Yeah,
Jones, you have to have something to distinguish yourself. So it's at Donna A. Jones. So that's where
great.
I am.
Great. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. So,
Great. Thank you.
well, thank you so much. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. And we talk again soon.
I do too. Thank you so much, Candace. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.